Hello guys, welcome back to another episode here on European Confessions. There is a message that I want to share with you guys, and this message, it comes from a translation of a message that I received, and the message reads like this. Hello Brother Nanshi, can you please post my story? I am a man who is aged 48 years old. My brother, my story goes on like this. I started working at a very young age. When I started working, it was not because at school I was someone who was very dull and I wanted out of school. I was quite an intelligent man, but because of the poverty that was there in the family, my parents could not pay for my school fees anymore. When I found out that my parents could not pay for my school fees anymore, what I used to do is that I used to go to the library so that I can study. But still, it was not enough, because whenever I would go to school, the teacher would then find out that my school fees was not yet paid. Then I would be kicked out of school. Like in a schooling term, maybe I would only attend classes for something like 3 weeks or so. Then the rest of the schooling days, each and every day, when I would go to school with other kids that I was attending the same school with, then the same thing will keep on happening over and over again. The teacher, whenever the teacher would enter into the classroom where I'll be sitting, I'll be the first one to be asked if I had paid the school fees or not, and if not, then the teacher would ask me to leave her or his classroom. Then, as someone who had that desire to be great in life, to that desire to complete my education, knowing that education was going to be the key to my life, I then started going to the library so that I can read. Brother Nashi, even right now, the only reason why I am able to speak English fluently, it is because I didn't learn English in school, because I never proceeded with my education, but it was because I had that desire to keep on reading and reading. That is when I came up with this other idea. I had told myself that it was far much better to go around collecting scrap metals like aluminium and copper and things like that. Then I will recycle those scrap metals that I would have collected from the neighborhood, and I would go to the scrapyard to recycle them. And I was also having that idea of recycling glass bottles. So at that time, Brother Nashi, I then started going around the neighborhood. At that time, I didn't have enough money to buy scrap metal from people, so I then started with glass bottles because they were much cheaper. What I'll do is that after I had bought those glass bottles from the neighborhood, I will then go to this other place where there was a scrapyard, and I will sell those glass bottles. After that, I had managed to save up some money. In our country, we have these big trolleys. They are used by people that carry other people's goods. Like if you have any heavy groceries or anything heavy that you can't carry on your own, that is when you hire those people that will push those big trolleys for you. So I had been saving up money so that I can buy that big trolley. After I had started saving for that money, but still, Brother Nashi, life was very difficult, because whatever money that I could get, that money will go straight into the house, because my parents, they were really struggling. From there on, that was when I thought of the idea of going around stealing a lot of copper, aluminium and other scrap metals, but I was not doing it in the same location where I was staying. I would move into another location, and once I was in that location at night, that is when I'll start to steal copper and I'll steal other scrap metals that will just be lying around. Brother Nashi, at that time, that was when white people, they were moving out of Zim, so there were a lot of abandoned houses, especially in the suburbs of Harare, where a lot of people that were white, where a lot of white people used to stay. When I noticed that there was an opportunity for my business, I then started operating in those areas where there was a lot of abandoned houses houses that had been left behind by a lot of white people that were running away from Zim. What I'll do is that I would get into those abandoned houses and I'll start stripping off whatever metals that I could find, be it copper, metal or anything. And I noticed that in a lot of neighborhoods where there were those abandoned houses, there were a lot of tools that were made out of aluminium, especially the tools that I used when one is cleaning the swimming pool. So I used to take the brushes and the cleaning stuff that were made out of aluminium. Then after collecting the aluminium and the copper, I would go and sell them to the scrap yards. That was how I was making a lot of income. So when I was doing all of this, unfortunately, Brother Nashi, I thought that I was going to further my education. Business was growing, but I then got arrested after I had gone to this other farm. Whilst I was on that farm, that was when I was caught stripping off some copper cables, and I was then arrested and I went to prison for 8 months. When I came back, I then found out that out of poverty, the money that I had left behind for my mom to keep it, she had used all of that money. They told me that they didn't have any money in the house, so they ended up using that money. Brother Nashi, this was really challenging because I didn't know what to do anymore. When I came out of prison, my father then said that he was sorry, but he was going to speak with one of his supervisors. At that time, my father was working for this electrical company that is here in Zim that is called Zesa. My father was working as one who was a trench digger. They used to dig the trenches for Zesa. It was a very hard job. Then my father told me that he had spoken with his supervisor and the supervisor was willing to give me a chance. That was when I started working with my father. When I started working with my father, still the job that we were doing, it was a very tough job. Every day it was a heavy manual labor of digging and digging and digging each and every day. And we were digging in an area that is called Nyanga, just close to the Nyanga mountains. That was where we were working. We used to stay at this other certain village there in Nyanga. But when we were staying in that village, I had then came into contact with this other woman who was a local healer. I used to speak with her a lot because at the place where we were sleeping, it was just close to her homestead, until finally I approached her and I told her that I was someone who had a destiny, because when I was growing up, Brother Nashi, I kept on hearing like voices in my head when I would be walking in this other small bush that was nearby the location where we were staying. So whenever I would go through that bush, it was like there was someone who would be speaking with me, and the voice that used to speak with me, it would be like, I want you to develop this area, and when you have developed this area, I want you to turn it into a school, and after you have built your school in this area, I want you to have a department where you will have an orphanage. So I told that traditional healer everything that I used to hear when I would be going past through that small bushy area that was just close to the location where I grew up in. After I had told that woman, she then told me that this meant that there was a sign that the ancestors wanted to gift me, and they wanted me to take care of orphans. So they had decided me to give me a lot of wealth, and I had to build a school. And after building that school, I had to do whatever the voices that I used to hear were going to tell me. Unfortunately, Brother Nashi, after everything that had happened, for a little while I came here to South Africa and I started working. But when I came to South Africa, life got even harder and I chose to return back home. And when I returned back home, when I went to that place where I grew up in, thinking that the voice that I used to hear was going to speak with me again, when I got off from the taxi, unfortunately, I saw that there was a lot of people that were staying there, and a lot of land barons are still fighting for that piece of land. And those voices, Brother Nashi, they no longer speak with me. But when I was still a young man, those voices, they used to speak with me. So that healer that I had met when we were working in Nyanga, she had told me that the voices that I used to hear speaking to me, they were voices of my ancestors that wanted to give me great wealth. She then told me that whilst she was looking at my family's history, unfortunately the ancestors had told her to tell me that they could not give me all the blessings because in our family there was this other uncle of mine who had murdered someone. And this uncle of mine, Brother Nashi, he died whilst he was in prison. At that time when he passed away, he was somewhere around 28 years old, but at that time he was still locked up in prison because he had killed someone after having a argument when they were drinking beer. Then that traditional healer told me that this is what the ancestors were telling her to tell me, that they cannot give me this gift because there was too much blood in our family. So a cleansing ceremony had to be done, but unfortunately for this cleansing ceremony to be accepted by my ancestors, I had to wait until I had a child. And if I will ever have a male child, then I had to bring my child to that woman so that the cleansing ceremony can be done. So after we had finished working there in Nyanga, me and my father and the rest of the crew, we returned back to Harare. And when we returned back to Harare, Brother Nashi, I then met this other woman that I started dating. After I started dating her, she then fell pregnant, and after she had fallen pregnant for me and after giving birth, and I saw that the child that had been born, it was a boy child, that was when I thought of returning back with my child and my wife back to that woman who had given me a good prophecy there in Nyanga. But at that time I didn't know that at the place where I was going back to, she wanted me to become a ritualist. In our language we call it Koromba, because everything that she kept on telling me as she was having a consultation with me and my wife, it was all about sacrifices, blood sacrifices and nothing else. And at that time, the reason why my wife had agreed to go with me to Nyanga, it was because I had lied to her. I had told her that the only reason why I was able to give birth, it was because that woman had told me that there were people in my family who had placed some charms on my body so that I can never be able to bear children. So I wanted to return back to her so that I can thank her, but I was just lying to my wife. When I returned back, as we were doing our consultation, that was when that woman took my son. After she had taken my son, she then placed my son just before me at the place where me and my wife were sitting. She then gave me a big knife, and after she had given me that big knife, she told me that I had to press that knife. You know, when a child is still young, there is a place on top of his head, and when you look at that place, you can see that the skin will be moving up and down. In our language, we call it Nova. That is where she told me to place the tip of the knife. After I had done that, she then grabbed the knife from me as if she was in a spiritual trance. And after I had looked at the knife that she had just grabbed from me, I saw that the blade of that knife, there was a lot of blood that was just dripping off. So I thought that maybe I had made a mistake and I had stabbed my son. But when I looked at my son, he was really happy. He was laughing and playing just like kids do. And there was no blood on the spot where I had pointed him with a knife. But when I looked at that knife, I saw that there was a lot of blood that was just dripping from that knife's blade. Then that woman told me that the ancestors had accepted my gift and they were going to give me a great gift of wealth, so that I can build the school and I can build that orphanage. And still after building the school and the orphanage, a great wealth was going to be given to me. So that woman gave me a lot of charms that I was supposed to use. But Brother Nashi, when I returned back to Harare, instead of my life getting better, I then got fired for no reason at all, because now I was about to get permanently employed by ZESA. But before I could get permanently employed by ZESA, there was this other opportunity that we were supposed to be taken to. It was a training program so that I could have become an electrical engineer, and after becoming an electrical engineer, then I'll be permanently employed by that company. Brother Nashi, when I got fired, I started struggling a lot. And the way that I was struggling, it was much, much worse than the way that I used to struggle before. Unfortunately, Brother Nashi, then my son started having a problem of bleeding. Sometimes he could even bleed throughout the night, and there was no money for us to keep on running to and from the hospital. And the way that he was bleeding, it was quite scary. In those years, people used to use nappies instead of pampers. So sometimes when my wife wanted to change the baby's nap, then she will see that there was a lot of blood instead of poo or urine. This is what used to happen to my son. Then my son just passed away. On the day that he passed away, there was blood that was bleeding from the nose and the ears, not knowing where this blood was coming from. So, Brother Nashi, there was this other prophet prior to my son's death that had given me a prophecy. We had just met along the way when we were just walking in confusion, me and my wife. That was when that prophet told me that he wanted to speak with me, but he wanted to speak with me in private. So later on, when I had gotten the opportunity, I had returned back to that prophet's house, and when I had approached him, he said that unfortunately all of those things that I wanted to tell you, I can't tell you anymore because I have been threatened by that woman from Nyanga, that same woman that you met when you were working in Nyanga. Have you ever worked in Nyanga before? And this prophet, Brother Nashi, I had never told him that I had worked in Nyanga before, and this was like our first day ever meeting each other, but on this day it was like the second time meeting each other, and I could not even understand how someone would have managed to travel from Nyanga coming to Harare in such a short period of time. So I immediately knew that this was that same woman who had performed all of those spiritual rituals on me and my son. My son got so sick and he died, and that prophet had told me that I was supposed to tell my wife that I was the reason as to why my son had fallen sick, but I was afraid, thinking that my son was going to recover. After the death of my son, that was when I thought of returning back to Nyanga so that I can confront that traditional healer. I wanted to know what she had done with my son. But what happened, Brother Nashi, when I had gotten the money to go to Nyanga, the car that I was traveling in just before we had gotten out of Harare, the car was then involved in an accident, even though there was no one who got hurt in that accident. But when I came out of that car, I saw that my wallet had mysteriously disappeared, so much that I had to walk on foot coming from the place where we had that accident, coming back to the CBD. And it was quite a long distance that we had already traveled, Brother Nashi. After that, life became very tough until I approached this other traditional healer. We used to call him the chairman in that location that we used to stay, but he was also a traditional healer. He then spoke with me and he told me that he had seen that woman who was from Nyanga had stolen the spirit of my son, and my son was now transformed and he had been turned into a tokoloshi, or into a goblin, because this is what that woman wanted. By the time that I had returned to have a consultation with her, she was facing a lot of problems because there was one of her customers who had came to her who was in need of a tokoloshi, or that goblin, but she had already used up the money that she had taken from that customer of hers, and she could no longer produce any tokoloshis, because on each and every grave that she used to go to trying to raise up the dead, she could not do anything anymore, because she had gone to this other grave where they had sorted out the grave with a lot of charms. So when she went to that grave, then those charms had affected her. She could not wake up the dead anymore and turn them into tokoloshis or goblins. So when I arrived at her homestead, she saw that opportunity. Then she decided to steal the soul of my son, and that is how my son passed away. And after my son had died, she then harvested my son's soul, and already my son, that man told me that my son is already being used as a tokoloshi or a goblin. I didn't even know how to explain this situation to my wife, so I remained quiet, just going around looking for money, telling myself that if I get that chance, I will travel back to Nyanga. But since that year, Brother Nashi, life has been very difficult for me. Even at the time when I had decided to return back to South Africa looking for any kind of opportunity, but one could see that South Africa was not meant for me, so I returned back home. Brother Nash, even now, so many years have gone by, but I am still suffering. I don't even know if that traditional healer is still alive, but all that I want is to confront that traditional healer so that I can ask her, where did she put the soul of my son, because she never gave my son the opportunity to live. Dear listeners, right there was a message that I received. And then we had to give you this translation. Our dear brother then sent me another message, and he said that the last time that I attempted to go to Nyanga so that I can confront this traditional healer, something bad then happened to me. I started to have a dream, and I dreamt of that old lady. She was standing in front of me, but she was holding a walking stick. But this walking stick, I then noticed that it was sharpened as if it was a spear. Then she held that sharpened walking stick against me. Then she said, next time if you try to do this, I am going to end your entire generation. Not knowing the meaning of this dream, Brother Nashi.